The Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act is there to ensure that warrants are obtained on just cause before surveillance takes place. But one clause allows the Foreign Secretary to issue certificates of broad interception for categories of material, which has been taken to justify tracking the activity of millions of internet and phone users. Internally referred to as the mastering of the internet, which the NSA paid to access, Project Tempora is ultimately designed to secure access to 90% of the cables routed through the UK. As of last year, GCHQ already had access to over 21 petabytes of data per day. That's more than 3 billion books worth.
In the absence of the technologies which will allow the security agencies to focus in and find that person who is the terrorist, in the absence of technologies to do that, I don't think there's very much choice at the moment.
Our view is that the Tempora programme, GCHQ's programme, potentially breaches the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 8, the right to respect for a person's private life, in two ways. Firstly, we are concerned that there isn't really an adequate legal basis for what is going on.
The leaks also revealed the extent to which GCHQ feared a damaging public debate if the extent of their surveillance activities ever became known, and a legal challenge under the Human Rights Act. When it comes to domestic surveillance, telecommunication tapping is just one element of a broad range of tactics used by security services and the police, such as undercover infiltration and paid informants. At that level, there are two domestic groups that appear to be targeted: political activists and Muslims. What is remarkable about the GCHQ NSA operation is its sheer scale. Almost everyone is under Big Brother's gaze. But that is not to say that discrimination isn't being practiced as well.
I think what should be happening is that far more work should be done on trying to identify the type of person who could become a terrorist in the first place. For example, you and I would not be capable of butchering somebody to death. I would not be capable, I don't think, of taking my own life for a cause, and I don't think that I would be vulnerable to extreme radicalisation. Should we be identifying at a much earlier stage somebody who is likely to go down that road? Now, that's a very controversial thing to say, but I think because there's so much happening in the cyber world, it may be that the security agencies are going to have to start looking elsewhere and in a more focused way.
The NSA has been pursuing the targeted collection of the online activities of Muslim figures involved in what it defines as radicalisation. These records were distributed to a number of government agencies with the stated aim of undermining targets' credibility, reputation, and authority. And this is not the first instance of surveillance targeting Muslim communities. In Britain, surveillance techniques are also being deployed by the police.
Project Champion, when it was first sold to us, was sold to us as a scheme, as a crime reduction scheme. So hopefully all these cameras that were going to be put in were going to reduce the level of crime within mainly three areas, and those three areas are predominantly Muslim areas. So you've got the ward of Springfield, Washwood Heath and Ward End. Now, we were looking at about a total of 300 cameras. We weren't told about the covert cameras, but I think because it was sold as a crime reduction scheme, we all agreed to it, because obviously who doesn't want to live in a safer environment, a better neighbourhood, safe for your kids and your parents to walk around in. So that's what Project Champion was originally sold to us. And then as it transpired later on, we found out that obviously it had absolutely no value whatsoever in terms of reducing crime per se. So if somebody was to get mugged or something underneath one of these cameras, unfortunately it would do nothing for it, because these were what's known as ANPR cameras, which is automatic number plate recognition cameras. So all they ever did was monitor each and every vehicle that came in and out of these three areas. And the way that these cameras were placed, and let me reiterate, it was over 300 cameras and 72, I think, covert cameras. So nearly in the region of 400 cameras watching your every single move coming in and going out of these three areas. which was basically saying, everybody who within this area is being criminalised.
It took an independent investigation, again by The Guardian, for the real source of funding to be traced, back to the Counter-Terrorism Department of the Home Office.
I believe that in terms of democracy and free speech, we're losing, because everybody now feels that if they go on record and say, hang on, we don't believe in this government policy, or we don't believe in that government policy, all of a sudden they might become an enemy to the state. So I think people's freedom of speech, maybe not on a blunt level, but more on a subtle level, is being taken away, simply because people are now more afraid of opening up than they were before. So I think it's going to have a huge effect in the long run.
Britain's National Domestic Extremism Unit keeps a secret database of almost 9,000 campaigners it classifies as domestic extremists. Most have no criminal record, and some have raised eyebrows, like Dwayne Brooks, witness to the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence, whose testimony contributed to a public inquiry into the institutional racism of the police. Meanwhile, police were spying for the political persuasions of those campaigning with the Lawrence family, searching for information that might discredit them and bugging Dwayne's meetings with his lawyer. The Metropolitan Police declined to give comment for this film.
Anybody who works for an organisation for liberty, people working for civil society organisations, people involved in protests, are naturally going to be concerned about what we're hearing about the government GCHQ's capabilities. We are concerned that we, as an organisation that is sometimes very critical of the government, particularly critical of the way this government and previous governments responded to the terrorism threat, we are concerned that we may ourselves have been subject to surveillance because we've been critical of the government, and I think that's not unreasonable.
Traditionally, democratic countries always fly the flag of national security, because if you fly the flag of national security, which is the most important priority, the security of the citizens, everyone's going to be deferential. They're going to genuflect. They're going to say, you say national security minister or official or intelligence agency, then you must be right and then we'll obey you. But actually, often they use national security to hide embarrassment. And there are countless cases how the British have done that. Say, for example, how the British have, in one case I was writing about, there's a special case on someone called Binyam Mohammed, who was a UK resident who was secretly abducted by the CIA with a knowledge of Britain's security service, MI5, in Pakistan, and then eventually went to Guantanamo Bay, and his lawyers took the case to court. So he sued the British government for their involvement in this case, and he was tortured and so on. And the British government said, we can't possibly really reveal information about what we knew about this because our national security would be involved, would be harmed. And what they meant then was that actually, because the national security would be harmed, because they didn't want them to know, the court or anyone, the British public, to know anything about what the British security services were doing in cooperation with the American CIA to torture these people. Because if they did reveal that information, then they say that would embarrass or that would weaken, damage Britain's relations with the Americans, which we have a very high, close intelligence relations with. That means the British government in future wouldn't have so much intelligence from America, and that in turn would damage or weaken Britain's national security. So in the end of the day, it is a question of trust and what the agents, the intelligence agencies and the staff there are doing, and are they kind of, if they have a kind of ethos which prevents them from abusing their power, their secret power, or not.
Coming up in Part 2, we investigate what happens when surveillance technology and spies themselves fall into corporate hands. We'll also take a look at Snowden's revelations surrounding governments spying on governments and ask what this means for the principle of national sovereignty.